Hi, welcome to Cincinnati Law Works, your local monthly law magazine show where we discuss law-related news and information that you can use. I'm attorney Mike Weber.
And I'm attorney Daryl Crosthwaite. On today's show,
the Law News Docket, where Daryl and I will be discussing the effects of construction lawsuits on local communities and their businesses.
On our guest docket, we're going to interview attorney John Higgins with Frost Brown Todd. John will discuss his background as a construction litigation attorney and answer some specific questions related to items in our news docket. John will also discuss his role in the Kenwood Town Place project litigation.
On our resource docket, Daryl and I will provide information related to citizen participation in the community development, the importance of personal involvement in that, and how you can become more involved with development in your community.
Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for our news docket coming up next.
Welcome to the Law News Docket, the part of the show where we review law-related stories in the news and how they affect us. Today we're going to talk about the effects of litigation on construction and subsequent development in our communities. The recent high-profile litigation related to the Kenwood Town Place project development has brought to light some of the possible effects litigation can have on a development and on a community as a whole.
The original anchor tenants were supposed to be the Container Store, Crate and Barrel, Ethan Allen, Kroger, and LA Fitness. In March 2008, Borders Books announced that it would open a store in the complex, stating it's going to be one of their new prototype stores. It was set to be 28,000 square foot Borders new concept store.
At the end of 2008 and the start of January 2009, several contractors filed almost $5 million in liens against the Bear Creek Capital's Kenwood Town Place. In late January 2009, problems with the development project began to surface as more than 24 liens were filed that had a combined total of $17 million over a 2-week period. While the liens were being placed, the complex was partially under construction and partially occupied by several stores, leaving them in a state of limbo.
Bank of America filed a foreclosure lawsuit in the Hamilton County Court of Common Pleas against Bear Creek Capital and the developers of the Kenwood Town Place in May of 2009. Bank of America was seeking repayment of $81.3 million in loans and a sheriff sale of the location. LA Fitness became the first tenant to sue the developers for $600,000 in unpaid construction costs. Kenwood Town Place was placed in the receivership in June 2009. Kroger closed their store in Kenwood Town Place on May 30th, 2010. Kroger executive stated that this is the first time that they've had to close a new store, stating more than $8 million in losses.
Joining us today is our special guest, attorney John Higgins, who will weigh in on this and other construction matters. John is a litigator and a member of the construction law group at Frost Brown Todd. He specializes in complex business and construction litigation, and he has litigated cases in 64 of Ohio's 88 counties. John, you were very involved in this Kenwood Town Place. What effects, short or long term, did this have on the community and these businesses and other businesses?
The failure of that project was really a disaster for the community. That all of Cincinnati, I would say for sure. That's the heart. Kenwood is the heart of the retail district in Cincinnati, and Sycamore Township is where it sits. But if you think about that timing, 2008, 2009, that's when the national economy really started to tank. And construction can really be a good barometer for the economy. If the economy is going well, there's a lot of construction, there's a lot of development, a lot going on. When the economy tanks, construction really dwindles. So in particular, the Kenwood project, when that failed, you had several subcontractors who weren't paid millions of dollars, and quite frankly, most of them never saw a penny of the money. And it was very unfair that people who showed up and did an honest day's work and put a lot of time and effort into that project didn't get paid, and the result for several of those contractors is they went out of business. What you saw around that same period of time is as the economy in general floundered and construction floundered, you saw a lot of people leaving the construction industry and going into other types of work. Now, as we sit here today in 2015, the economy has come back somewhat. The construction industry has come back somewhat. In fact, it's really starting to boom. If you look around town, you'll see the cranes in the air and whatnot. And there's a real shortage of skilled labor. There's a shortage of labor in general, but I think if I was in high school today and I wanted to make a good living, I would go learn how to be an electrician or a carpenter or some trade like that. Fortunately for the Kenwood project, I represented the contractors who had the glass, the steel, and the concrete, and they survived that storm. They're still in business today. They're thriving. They did recover some money from that project, and most of them are working today on completing the project with the new ownership and the new vision.
Okay.
Yeah, we talked earlier off air, and I made a comment that it sounded a whole lot like the Erpenbeck case from many years ago over in northern Kentucky, where a lot of the subcontractors weren't paid, and a lot of those subcontractors went out of business. And in not only that, but a lot of homeowners suffered as a result of that. Similar, sort of, in this kind of situation?
Yeah, I think it's very similar. Matt Daniels was the principal of Bear Creek Construction and Kenwood Town Place, LLC. Think back to the origin of this project and how it all came to into existence, if you will. And Matt Daniels was sort of the guy who ran all that. And the facts are very comparable to the Erpenbeck situation. The only difference is the result in the criminal trial. Mr. Daniels was tried in federal court and was acquitted of all charges. Now the CFO of the Bear Creek Construction, I believe, pled guilty to some felonies.
You also, I think, talked about the fact that Norwood was in, that the reason this Kenwood project became such an important issue is because originally some of these tenants were supposed to be in Norwood?
Yeah, sure. Let me really, you have to understand the context of the Kenwood project. Initially, most of the tenants who were slated to go in at Kenwood were slated to go in down at the second phase of Rookwood down in Norwood. And if you recall, back 5 years before Kenwood got underway, early part of 2000s, there was a lot of litigation with the city of Norwood and some homeowners in the whole eminent domain issue. That went all the way to the Supreme Court. That's the Norwood versus Gamble and Norwood versus Horney cases that went all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court.
For all of our viewers, can you give us a little more of a definition of the eminent domain and how?
Yeah, sure. That's eminent domain means when the government comes and takes your property, and the question is for what, and they have to compensate you when the government takes your property. It's not a desirable situation because you're not going to get top dollar when the government takes your property. It's much more desirable if you have a developer who wants to put a mall where your house is, and you're more likely to get top dollar. So with that Rookwood project down there, you had a developer who came in, offered people good value for their homes, and most of them took it. 95% of them took the money. There were 2 or 3 families who held out and said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to sell out. I've lived here my entire life and I still want to. About 4 blocks from where I grew up, I might add. So the city of Norwood said, we're going to force the issue and the government's going to take your house. Now the legal issue in the case and the practical issue in that case is, can the government take your house for a purely economic reason? It's clear that the government can take your property for some general public use. You know, if they were going to make a park or widen the road or something like that. Mm-hmm. The issue was, can the government take your house to help a developer with a commercial project?
So basically what we've got is another construction law or a very similar type of law litigation situation that led to ultimately the Kenwood Town Center, which is what's going to be the subject of our next section of our show. But if you could you summarize what the finding was from the court?
Sure. In the city of Norwood cases, the Ohio Supreme Court said the government cannot take your property for purely commercial purposes. But while that project was delayed, other people came up with this idea, let's build this project up the road in Kenwood, and attracted all of those tenants who were going to go down at Rookwood up to Kenwood.
And that's what we're going to cover in the interview with the guest docket, of which you, of course, are the guest. So that will be coming up next. If you'd like to weigh in on today's news docket, go to our Facebook page, Cincinnati Law Works, like us, and follow us to get updates for future shows. Stay tuned for the guest docket coming up next.
Welcome to our guest docket. Today we're going to interview attorney John Higgins with Frost Brown Todd. John, why don't you give us a little background with regard to where you went to school and kind of your hobbies and your interests?
Absolutely. I am a proud graduate of Norwood High School. I was born and raised in Norwood. Back in those days I worked for a grocery store called Thriftway, and I started out at the old Kenwood store, which I think now is a Staples. Thriftway's out of business, of course. But I worked in the grocery stores for a couple of years, and then worked out at the warehouse loading trucks. And for 11 years, I paid my way through college, and I graduated undergrad at the University of Cincinnati. I worked mostly second and third shifts at the warehouse for Thriftway. After I paid my way through the University of Cincinnati, I enrolled in law school up at Cleveland State University. I had previously been to Cleveland one time. It was to see a Pink Floyd concert. Decided it would be a fun place to move and go to law school. Likewise, paid my way through law school. I started practicing law initially in Cleveland, and importantly met my wife up in Cleveland, who's also a lawyer. I practiced at a law firm up there for about 2 or 3 years. My wife was appointed an assistant attorney general for the state of Ohio, so we had to move to Columbus. We lived in Columbus for a couple of years, and I practiced at a firm there. And then about 12 years ago, I got the opportunity to come back to Cincinnati, to my hometown, and work at Frost Brown Todd, where I'm now a partner at Frost Brown Todd. I'm in the unique position, having lived in the 3 major cities in Ohio, that my claim to fame is, at least no one's proven it wrong yet, is I think I've litigated more cases in more counties in Ohio than anyone, just by virtue of having lived in the 3 major cities. At Frost, and I've always done litigation, primarily complex business litigation and construction litigation. My focus has turned out to be what I call disaster construction projects, such as the Kenwood Town Place project.
How did you get into the construction litigation area?
You know, that's a very good question. I have a blue-collar background. Norwood was a blue-collar town, and like I said, for 11 years I worked a blue-collar job. And I'm very much drawn to that, and the good thing about working with construction clients is most of them are very blue-collar. One of my favorite things is you can deal with the CEO of a construction company who's likely to be wearing blue jeans and a shirt rather than a suit and tie.
You know, we're here to discuss the Kenwood Town Center project, and you know, you were there from the very, very beginning, and I think it's just an absolutely fascinating story, and I'm sure our viewers will find that to be the case. So if you could, why don't you just start from the beginning and tell us a story about Kenwood Town Center?
Sure. You know, a lot of people don't realize that when you represent a client, you know, you're very much a trusted advisor to that client. And I make it a point to understand and know the business of my clients, and such was the case with the Kenwood project. I initially represented George Steele, who fabricated the steel for the Kenwood project, and Sofco Erectors erected the steel. So I kept in regular contact with my client, George Steele, to understand how the project was going. Now keep in mind the origin of the Kenwood project was the I don't want to say failed, but stalled project down at Rookwood and Norwood. That case was pending in litigation in the Ohio Supreme Court, which really gave rise for the opportunity to move that project up the road to Kenwood, to the heart of the retail district. So throughout the project, I knew when my client started working on the project. I knew when they were not getting paid. You know, hey, a month went by and we're owed $1 million. 5 months went by, we're at $5 million.
Let me ask you to step back a little bit from that. You know, the Rookwood project is stalled, nothing's really happening there. who were the players that put together the project to go from there to take those stores and other tenants and put together the whole project up in Kenwood?
You know, really the main developer of Kenwood, if you will, was a guy named Matt Daniels, who probably most of the viewers are familiar with the name. Matt had a development company called Bear Creek Development, or various variations of Bear Creek. Bear Creek Capital. Their office was in downtown Montgomery. So Matt was sort of the developer. He had other investors with him as well and other partners. But Matt was the driving force. He formed with his investors, formed a single purpose LLC called Kenwood Town Center LLC, or Kenwood Town Place, excuse me. Right. Kenwood Town Place LLC. He also formed a single purpose construction company called Bear Creek Construction LLC, which interestingly enough had never ever constructed anything because it was a brand new company. Mm-hmm. And there was a guy named Aubrey Tarpley, I didn't say that very clearly, who was hired to run Bear Creek Construction. So the way the delivery method, if you will, on Kenwood was you had this single purpose limited liability company with Matt Daniels and his investors, and then you had Bear Creek Construction, which was owned by primarily Matt Daniels and Bear Creek, and then a guy named Aubrey Tarpley to run that company. And then you had several subcontractors underneath. I represented several of the subcontractors underneath.
And when did you figure out, or what happened, or what led to you getting involved in the project? How did that come about?
Sure. Back to the timeline, if you will. So I was aware that George Steele wasn't getting paid timely. And there were a lot of promises of payment, flat out lies of payment from Bear Creek and others. They would promise payment on a certain date, and it just wouldn't show up. This was in the fall of 2008. And George Steele made the decision right around Thanksgiving 2008 to pull off the project. So if you recall what that project looked like, the steel was being fabricated and erected. The steel got all the way to the roof. They call that the deck. We got to the point, if we put the deck on, we didn't think we'd have any leverage to ever get paid. So we thought it would be a great time to pull off the project, which is what we did. We pulled off the project, hoping for a quick resolution that we'd see some money. Unfortunately, as everyone knows, that project sat there for several years looking like a steel skeleton sticking up in the air. But at that time, we made the point to pull off. And I think it was about a week later, Matt Daniels came out and asked us to go back to work, but couldn't promise to pay us any money. So obviously, we didn't go to back to work. It was shortly after that you started seeing a lot of the other contractors pull off. I also represented the glass, architectural glass and metal on that project, and Baker Concrete, who did all the concrete for that project. So flash forward a little bit to the spring of 2009, and AGM, Architectural Glass and Metal, had delivered $3 million in value of glass. And the glass is essentially the outside of the building, the windows. When you drive past it, that's what you see. So about $3 million in inventory sitting around that building that they hadn't been paid for. And you think they would either pay you for it or give it back, and we would do neither. So we had to go to court and get a court order that we could take that glass back, which we did. So we had a little bit of leverage, or at least we thought. We had the glass to finish it, we had the steel to finish it. I also represented the concrete. Shortly after that, and so what you do at that point too, in general, is if you're in construction, you can file a mechanics lien that will give you a secured interest. If you provide labor or materials to a project, you file a mechanics lien and you go record it, much like you would record your bank probably records a mortgage on your house. At least I have a mortgage on my house.
At the recorder's office and the county recorder's office?
Right.
And when you file the lien, is that actually against the Bear Construction, or does it go against the bank, or does it go against both?
When you file a mechanics lien, it goes against the property. So whoever is the owner of the property it's an encumbrance on the title to that property. So in this case, the Kenwood project was owned by Kenwood Town Place LLC, and they had several encumbrances. First, they had a mortgage levied against it, so that goes against the title, against the owner, and then the mechanics lien, the same thing. And what got to be the complex issue in the case was the dispute amongst the secured interests between the mechanics lien holders and the mortgage, which is not a very interesting issue, but it was a very complex legal issue. And when the bank filed a foreclosure action, you can do the same thing too with your mechanics liens. So right around May or June of 2009, Bank of America, who at that point held the mortgage, if you will, on the property, filed a foreclosure action. And the way that works is anyone who has a secured interest is a party to the litigation. So all of the mechanics lien holders, the county, if you owe taxes, those are all parties to the litigation. And you sort out who has the first and best priority, and then you figure out who's going to get paid if there's any money to pay anyone.
How was the issue resolved?
Well,
or has it been resolved?
That issue has been resolved. It took several years of litigation. Normally, when that happens, it's clear legally that the mortgage has the first and best priority. We felt that there was a very good argument that the legal document, which is called a notice of commencement, that would give the bank the first and best priority. We thought the notice of commencement was defective. It's essentially a 1 or 2 page document, and by law in Ohio it has to contain, I think it's 13 or 15 pieces of information, and we thought at least 5 pieces of those information were not accurate. So we went and litigated that issue. We said, look, we don't think the notice of commencement is valid because we think it has inaccurate information. If you throw out that document, the mechanics liens have the first and best priority. The trial court ruled against us on that issue. We appealed that issue up to the Court of Appeals. Unfortunately, we never got there because the bank who held the mortgage made a point to make the appeal moot. So we never got to resolve that. What happened is once the appeal became moot, as you know, as lawyers, the issue's dead. You don't even talk about it. Now, the way it became a moot point is the project was forced through the sheriff's sale. And the way that works is if you get a judgment and you're a secured creditor, the sheriff comes and auctions off the property and distributes the proceeds.
So what happened with the sheriff's sale? Did it go forward?
The sheriff's sale went forward. I'm trying to think of the timing on that. I'm going to say it was about 2, maybe 3 years ago. And it's interesting. If you're a creditor, you can bid on the property at the sheriff's sale. Let me back up about the value of the property. The sheriff goes out and has the duty to appraise the property. And then there's a minimum bid that has to come in if anyone wants to buy the property. But if you're a secured creditor, you can bid about, I believe the rule is 2/3 of your debt towards the purchase price, which is sort of tricky because you're not really spending real money. You know, you have a piece of paper that says I'm owed $96 million or whatever the bank had in this case. Mm-hmm. So they pledged, and I think the sheriff's sale was $27 million. So the bank, and the way that works is you don't pay $27 million out of pocket, you just reduce your debt. So if your debt was 96 and you just pledged 27 to obtain the property, now you're only owed 96 minus 27. That's what happened here. It's hard to outbid somebody when you have $96 million of not real money to bid, and I'm sure if someone had real money that could outbid that, the bank would have gladly taken it. So the bank had the first and best priority. The project went through the sheriff's sale, which made the appeal moot, and that issue was resolved. Of course, there's new ownership now, and the project's going forward under new ownership.
John, we appreciate your time today. Thank you for sharing this information. I know I've learned a lot today based on this issue, and I appreciate you coming down today.
Sure. Absolutely. It was great to have you here, John.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Stay tuned for our resource docket coming up next.
Welcome to the Resource Docket. Today, Daryl and I would like to look at the importance of community involvement in regards to the community as a whole and some resources to help you become more involved in your neighborhood or township here in Cincinnati.
Citizen participation in community decision-making can be traced as far back as Plato's Republic. Plato's concept of freedom of speech, assembly, voting, and equal representation have evolved through the years to form the basic pillars upon which the United States was established. Citizen participation is the essence of democracy.
Volunteer citizen participation continues to be one of the key concepts in American society. Traditionally, Americans have always wanted to be part of the decisions affecting their lives.
The town assembly, an American tradition, was also an early contributor to citizen participation. The town assembly was unique because all of the citizens in the community got together to decide on issues. Citizen participation was first used in Plymouth and Jamestown, but soon spread west as new settlements were established.
You know, volunteer groups function as links between the individuals and larger societal structures. And what's the benefit to the average citizen? What you see is that the individual will learn that group dynamics, as it applies to mixed groups, can be used to bring about change when you're dealing with a larger societal structure than just a mere individual.
In his book, Principles of Public Involvement, Thomas A. Heberlein notes that the public involvement results in better decisions. He argues that community decisions that involve citizens are more likely to be acceptable to local people. Better community decisions, by definition, should be beneficial to the average citizen. Citizen participation in community affairs serves to check and balance political activities. Participation allows fuller access to benefits of a democratic society. Partisan political favors, pork barreling, and nepotism are negative examples of unchecked political behavior. A cross-section of citizen participation in the decision-making process reduces the likelihood of community leaders making self-serving decisions.
You know, here in Cincinnati, we have a resource, which is the City of Cincinnati website. They have a specific page that is devoted to trade and development, and on that page, they have the tab for neighborhood development.
Once you have clicked on the neighborhood development page, you have a list of projects related to neighborhood developments. There are also many valuable resources, including Neighborhood Support Program, Neighborhood Stabilization Program, and the Cincinnati Land Reutilization Program.
One other important resource is the Reference and Resource tab, which provides a community council directory. You can download a full directory with meeting dates, locations, and officers. If you live outside the city of Cincinnati, you will have to contact your individual township or city development for information.
We hope that you find this information and resources helpful enough for you to become involved in your community.
Thanks to our special guest, John Higgins, for joining us today, and thanks to you for watching.
Check us out on Facebook, like us, and follow up on future broadcasts. You can also check out some past episodes on our YouTube channel, Cincinnati Law Works.